The sun had barely risen when I entered the living room, dressed in my old uniform, the one they all laughed at. My cousins were already gathered, sipping tea, their laughter echoing louder than usual. As I walked in, their eyes immediately darted toward me, and within seconds, the snickering began. "Still wearing that delivery boy uniform?" one of them said, chuckling. Another added, "I heard you deliver groceries now. At least you're helping people. Save time." They all laughed. Even my uncle, who once praised hard work, said with a smirk, "At least he's not stealing. That's something, right?" I stood still, heart thumping in my chest, face burning. My little sister sat in the corner, looking at me with worried eyes. She knew how much I hated coming here, but it was Emma's request, family gathering. Elders' blessings, smile no matter what. I forced a smile, nodding slightly, pretending their words didn't cut deep. But inside, each joke, each sarcastic comment felt like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't just the jokes, it was the way they looked at me, like I was a stain, like I didn't belong. They had jobs in offices, wore suits, posted selfies in front of laptops and Starbucks coffee. And me, I delivered packages, sometimes until midnight, just to make enough to help Emma with rent and medicines. They didn't know the nights I spent skipping dinner so my sister could eat. They didn't see the bruises on my hands from lifting crates. All they saw was a boy in a cheap uniform, with no title, no salary slips, no LinkedIn achievements. Later that day, when I was in the kitchen helping Emma, I heard them again, this time louder. "He thinks one day he'll be rich, delivering dreams in plastic bags." Laughter again. Even the aunties joined in. I quietly walked out, eyes fixed on the floor, pretending I didn't hear a thing. But in my chest, something had snapped. It wasn't just shame anymore. It was a quiet rage, a fire. That night, as I sat alone in the dark, I didn't cry like usual. I planned. I picked up my broken phone, logged into YouTube, and started watching videos on business, digital marketing, and online sales. I didn't understand half of it, but I kept watching. Every joke, every insult, every smirk had carved something deeper inside me, a reason. They had laughed today, but they wouldn't forever. Everyone thought I was fine. I smiled when spoken to, laughed when expected, and nodded along to their shallow sympathies like they mattered. But no one saw the war inside me. No one heard the screams I swallowed every night. Ever since that evening at my uncle's house, something had changed. Not outside, no. They still mocked me. They still looked at me like a failure who didn't belong among educated people. But inside me, something was growing, a fire that burned quietly, hidden behind tired eyes and polite words. Each morning I'd wake up before the sun, quietly making chai for Emma before heading out. The roads were cold, the streets empty, and my cycle tires barely had enough air. My hands were numb, not just from the weather, but from the weight of everything I was carrying, expectations, shame, exhaustion. But I said nothing. Even when my back ached, I smiled at customers. When they threw crumpled cash at me like I was beneath them, I forced out a thank you. Not because I was weak, but because I knew. They didn't see me now, but one day they would. I'd come home at night, my shirt soaked in sweat, hands black from grease and dust. Emma would ask how my day was. I always said, "Zabardast." She didn't need to know how my legs trembled every time I stood too long. She didn't need to see the rejection messages I got from companies I had applied to late at night. But every no, every insult, every day of being invisible, I was collecting them. Not to break, to build. I'd sit in the dark after everyone slept, a cracked screen in front of me, watching business tutorials, learning from strangers who once had nothing like me. I'd take notes on paper bags, pause and rewind videos again and again until the words made sense. There was no one to teach me. Just trial, just pain. I didn't cry anymore. I had no time for that. I wasn't just surviving now, I was preparing. People thought the loudest people were the strongest. But I had learned that sometimes silence hides the deadliest storms. My pain didn't scream anymore. It studied. It trained. It burned inside me, not to destroy, but to fuel what I was becoming. The world still mocked me. But what they didn't know, what they never saw, was that their voices had become background noise. My focus was sharper, my mind clearer. Every wound had turned into a weapon. And when I would rise, and I would, they'd realize too late that the quietest boy in the room was the one who had already begun writing his victory. The night it rained hardest, I made a promise that no one heard. The clouds were raging above, thunder crashing through the sky like a warning, but I didn't flinch. I stood on the rooftop of our broken house, soaked to the bone, fists clenched, jaw tight. My eyes were shut, but inside everything was clear. That evening, my younger sister had come to me crying. Someone at school had laughed at her clothes, said things that made her bury her face in my chest and say, "Bye, jab hammer pass paise hong na, main sabko dika dunji." I didn't respond. I just held her tighter and whispered, "One day, inshallah." But inside, something snapped. I couldn't bear it anymore. Not the hunger, not the looks, not the fake pity, not the way people treated us like we were meant to stay at the bottom. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, I walked up the stairs. The city looked blurry through the rain, but my heart had never been more focused. I looked up at the sky and whispered the words that had been trapped inside me for years. I swear, I'll make something out of this nothing. It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't a dream. It was a vow. One I carved into my bones. I wouldn't say it again. I wouldn't share it with anyone. But that night, I changed. After that, my routine sharpened. I wasn't just learning at night, I was applying. I began taking freelance jobs no one wanted. The lowest pay, the dirtiest clients. They disrespected me, treated me like garbage, but I took it. Because I wasn't working for money anymore. I was building armor. I started saving every rupee. No chai from the dhaba, no new shoes, no Eid clothes. My friends laughed. By TU's into Haya Zombie? I smiled, if only they knew. I wasn't just living. I was investing. In my escape. Some nights I'd break. My hands would shake, my eyes would sting. And I'd ask Allah, how much longer? But then I'd remember that rooftop. That rain, that promise. I couldn't let the old me down. I wrote down my goals on a torn piece of cardboard and hid it behind my pillow. Every morning before leaving for the restaurant, I'd read it once, not to feel motivated, but to remind myself what I'd sworn to become. People still didn't notice. My uncle still called me Bekra. My cousin still smirked when I passed by. But none of that mattered anymore. Because while they were busy laughing at me, I had already declared war on my fate. And the first weapon I forged was a vow no one heard but the sky itself. My shift started at 4 p.m., but I would reach the restaurant by 3, not because I loved the job, but because I needed to study the system. The manager thought I was early because I was desperate, maybe I was, but not for the reasons he imagined. Washing dishes wasn't a job, it was punishment. Hot water that burned through the skin, leftover food that clung to your hands, and words from the kitchen staff that hit harder than fists. Oi, safai esi karwana plate sarpar marunga. I took it, every insult, every overtime hour, every bone-deep ache in silence. Because this was the cost of leveling up from the bottom. Every break I got, I didn't scroll Instagram. I didn't chat. I opened my second phone, the old one, cracked screen, barely alive. On it were YouTube tutorials about copywriting, SEO, cold emails, freelancing, mindset, every skill I thought could help me escape this cage. I listened, absorbed, noted down ideas while the noise of clanking plates and shouting chefs rang in the background. One night, after a 10-hour shift, I returned home to find the light bill unpaid and my sister crying quietly, trying to read her textbook by candlelight. Something inside me boiled. I went into the bathroom, turned on the tap, and let the cold water run over my face. I stared at the cracked mirror and said, Touch zyada takap war koi nahi yad rakna. I started applying for online gigs. Small ones. 200, 300. Can you write product descriptions? A foreign client asked. I said yes, even though I didn't know how. That night, I watched 5 tutorials, stayed up till 5 a.m., wrote the copy and earned my first $1. I still remember the moment that email came, payment released. I stared at those words like they were a prophecy. Because they were. That one line told me, it's possible. From then, the grind got real. I'd go straight from the restaurant to the masjid for fajr. Then sleep for 3 hours. Wake up and learn, apply, fail, repeat. I was functioning on caffeine, ambition, and sheer anger. The kind of anger that doesn't explode, it builds. My mother thought I was breaking down. She begged me to rest. I kissed her hands and said, Ami ek dafa chance dadeen. Fear kabi farmesh nahi hogi. She didn't understand, but she trusted me. Sometimes, clients ghosted me. Sometimes they insulted my work. But every time that happened, I told myself, good, this is part of the training. You're not weak. You're becoming dangerous. The city never noticed. I was just another brown face in a dirty apron. But behind those tired eyes, something was shifting. I wasn't dreaming anymore. I was building. Brick by brick, rupee by rupee, word by word. And somewhere deep inside, I knew this pain would pay off eventually. Quiet success has a different flavor. It doesn't need to scream, it echoes. The cousins who once laughed at his struggles were now facing storms of their own. The same boys who flexed their money, mocked his silence, and flaunted their flashy lives were now dealing with business losses, debts, and broken reputations. One had to sell his car to pay rent. Another got exposed for fraud. Their social media went from daily updates to complete silence. No more vacations. No more designer clothes, just disappearing acts and ignored calls. They never saw it coming. They thought their success would last forever. That mocking someone below them came with no consequences. But time doesn't forget and karma never misses. The world that once clapped for them now looked away. Fake friends vanished. Deals dried up. And slowly, they began to taste the bitterness of the fall. Meanwhile, he watched it all without saying a word. No revenge posts, no "I told you so." Just silence. But deep down, he remembered everything: the way they laughed when he had nothing. How they made fun of his efforts. How they tried to crush his self-respect. And now, those same voices had turned into echoes of regret. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about watching life unfold the way it always does, fair, even if delayed. They hit rock bottom while he kept climbing. The night air was thick, not with heat, but with tension. He hadn't seen me in years, not since the day I disappeared from the family's radar. The same cousin who laughed in my face, who stripped my father of dignity and life, now stood just a few feet away, unknowingly stepping into the storm he never saw coming. I watched him walk into the restaurant, the same place he used to mock me for never affording. His hairline thinner, his clothes screaming money, but his eyes still cold, still arrogant. I had reserved this table just for him. My assistant walked over to him, handed him the envelope. His eyes darted around the room before they landed on me. His smirk faded. I stood up, slow, calm. Each step toward him was the weight of years of pain, silence, and building an empire from nothing. He looked at me like he'd seen a ghost. "You," he muttered, voice shaky. "Me," I replied, the calmness in my tone slicing deeper than rage ever could. I placed the legal documents on the table. His company, his properties, even his precious farmhouse, all now mine. Legally, cleanly. He'd signed them without reading, trusting the wrong man in a shell company I built from the shadows. He opened the envelope, scanned the contents, and paled. For the first time, I saw fear. Real, helpless fear. "You ruined everything," he whispered. "No," I said, leaning in. "You did. The day you touched my father, you started this." And just like that, I walked away, leaving him broken. The face-to-face moment wasn't about violence. It was about victory, silent, sharp, and complete. He thought our face-to-face encounter was the end. He thought losing his properties was the worst blow I had planned. But I wasn't finished, not even close. Revenge isn't about one loud strike. It's about slow, silent erosion. That's what makes it cold. That's what makes it unforgettable. I began dismantling his world from the inside. His business contacts started pulling away one by one, not knowing I was the silent force behind the sudden shift in trust. Whispers spread about fraud, about embezzlement. Small rumors with deep roots. His investors withdrew. His bank accounts began to feel lighter. His employees began quitting. He blamed the market, bad luck, everything but himself. Meanwhile, I kept my distance. I didn't need to yell or gloat. My silence haunted him. Every time his phone rang, every lawyer letter that landed on his desk, it made him look over his shoulder. And every time, there was no one standing there, just the echo of his own sins. But it wasn't just financial. I found his mistress, paid her off to disappear, revealed the affair to his wife through a leaked hotel receipt. The marriage crumbled just as his empire did. He tried reaching out, called me, messaged me, even sent a letter. But I never responded. That was the cruelest part, denying him the satisfaction of closure. He deserved to sit in the ruins, confused, angry, alone. This wasn't revenge served hot with fire and fury. It was cold, calculated, and patient. And it worked. Because the man who once took everything from my father now sat in a rented apartment, drinking alone, staring at court papers, and wondering how it all slipped away. He never knew the storm had a name. Mine. Revenge doesn't always roar, it can whisper and still destroy. This story teaches us that while justice can be delayed, it never forgets. Those who betray family for greed may rise for a moment, but their fall is inevitable when they build their success on broken trust and blood. Cold revenge isn't about violence. It's about making the guilty live with the weight of their own sins, one consequence at a time. But even in revenge, we must remember healing ourselves should be the real victory. Because true power isn't in taking everything they lost, but in proving we never needed them to win.